Good morning, everybody. My name is Reddy Dauphin, and I'm one of the hosts and creators of Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. And I'm here with my sword teacher and one of my best friends in the world, Sensei Nicholas Swino, who is also one of the creators and hosts of Punch, Kick, Choke, Chat. And we're going to be doing one of our micro topics today. I really liked Sensei Swino. I actually watched the one we did on physical fitness, and I really enjoyed that one. It was a good one. So we're doing these micro topics where we do a deep dive. And I was brainstorming with Sensei Swino, and we decided we would dig into maybe some historical figures that were appealing to different instructors. And the one that we're going to talk about today is Yamaoka Tesshu. And this is one of Sensei Swino's very favorite samurai he's from the Bakumatsu period, which is the end of the Edo period. And that was a very tumultuous time in Japan. And as a result, Kateshu got to live a very colorful life. And so, Sensei Swino, as we get into this, how did he come onto your radar? When's the first time you heard about him, and what intrigued you about him?
Yeah, man. I would just say that beyond being one of my favorite samurai, I mean, he's kind of a personal hero of mine. As we'll get into, not only was he a great swordsman, but he just did so many other things. And regardless of what he did, the way he lived his life, his attitude was, I think, something I resonate with, and I think you resonate with, which is just go big, right? Live a big life, do a lot of cool stuff. And I think his philosophy was leave a steaming pile of flesh and bones behind. I'm not sure I'm there, but I do respect his desire to live a really cool life. He came on my radar. So when I was still in college, I was studying karate and dabbling in a little Aikido and Kung Fu. And I came upon a Chinese lady in my town who agreed to teach me calligraphy. So I thought I'd always, all my life, been read about people who, the samurai credo, right? Which pen and sword in accord. You should be good at martial arts. You should be good at literature. And so for me, that meant let's explore this whole shodo thing, this, pen, ink and brush calligraphy. So this lady started teaching me, and I was horrible at it because I'm left-handed. She made me do it right-handed. I would get anxiety. Like, very few things caused me anxiety, but I would get stomach aches from the intensity of desperation. Is probably like, it is. I'm so bad at this. It's got to be the worst thing I've ever done in my life. I struggled along, and I had this nice Chinese lady who would cook me meals and take care of me like I was her son, berating me for how horrible I was at calligraphy. And so in desperation, I started reading books and buying books about it. And I stumbled upon this book. I want to get the title right here. I stumbled upon this book, and it was Zen Kensho, the Zen calligraphy painting of Yamaoka Tesshu. And I think that's a John Stevens book. John Stevens is a pretty well-known translator and essayist. And it blew me away to see somebody so devoted to calligraphy, and just like how he made it a life path, just like we make Budo a life path, and how he got so incredibly good. And it was inspirational not only to read how good he was, but how, as he moved through his life, he became famous as a calligrapher. And so he would get a lot of money for his pieces. And so instead of collecting the money and becoming rich, he would write hundreds of pieces and sell them and raise the money to, like, if a temple burned down, he would donate the money to rebuild the temple or give it to poor people. His wife was always having fits because he would give their food away and their money away to the poor. But that just made me want to learn more about the guy. So that's how it all kind of got rolling.
That's interesting. I read that they estimate he did over 1 million pieces of calligraphy, like over 1 million. That's 10,000.
How many is that a day?
Yeah, right. Like 10,000 techniques for perfection of that technique, right? Like, so he perfected calligraphy however many times over, tenfold.
Yeah. Yep.
Funny, I just wanted to share with you that you're saying about how bad you were at calligraphy. When I was in Japan the first time, I went to a tea ceremony, and it was just this beautiful thing with these ladies, beautiful ladies, and like $10,000 outfits. And then after they came out and said, "Oh, well, you're going to make tea for us." And again, I was horrible at it. Like, I mean, I was sweating.
Yeah.
And as I was trying to pour the tea in, it's like spilling all over the tatami. And this place is super, and I'm super, my face is beet red. And the lady puts her arm on my, and she goes, "You're very good." And I just like burst out laughing, right? I'm like, I'm a sweaty pig in this beautiful place trying to do something. Anyway, back to Yamaoka Tesshu.
Yeah.
I read stuff Sensei about his, he was originally born into the Ono family, and then his parents died when he was really young, 16, 17. And then he was kind of like such a badass that at 20, he was hired into the Shogun's martial arts training academy. Do you have any details or thoughts on that you?
Well, before we get that far, I want to talk a little bit about one of his younger exploits. And by the way, I'm old. I've been hitting my head a lot, so these may be historically inaccurate, but I'm conveying them to convey the spirit of the thing.
Right.
Apparently, when he was young, like 9 years old or something, one of the ways they taught people how to write in those days was they made him transcribe these ancient Chinese poems, some of which were very long. And so he would transcribe these poems, and then his teacher would say, "Well, you should read them," and all that kind of stuff. And this kid was such a baller from an early age, like at age nine, I think. His teacher said, "Okay, well, you just transcribed this Chinese poem. I want you to read it." And Teshu's like, "Yeah, nothing doing. If I'm going to do this, I want an audience." He goes, "It's like, go big, 9-year-old going, go big or go home, sensei." And so they bring together everybody in the, who's in the community or whatever. And then this kid reads his poem to this giant audience. And that just sums him up so well. Let's not mess around. Let's do this big. He lived that way.
And speaking of big, he was big too, right?
Yes.
Like they say he was like very tall, over 200 pounds, like, which at that time in history would have been pretty much like a giant.
Yep. So what do you remember reading about that time period when he was doing the training you talked about?
So just that his family his mom had died when he was 16, and his dad had died when he was 17. And then he fell in love with a lady who is from a spear family. And that's how he got that name, Yamaoka Tesshu, because he married her, and then her father adopted him in. And I guess just because he came from his family, the Ono family, his mother and father were both martial artists too. It was a famous martial arts family. So he was already kind of being indoctrinated in that for his entire life. It kind of, I guess, reminds me of Sydney or somebody like that, right? Like the path was already there. And luckily he also had an aptitude for it. And then he was so good at it that I guess it was kind of unheard of that at 20, he would have been hired into that military academy, not only to train, but also to teach. At 20 years old, he was hired in to actually teach because he was that good.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some of the things I remember reading about.
Yeah, so many parallels between that and like the life of Miyamoto Musashi, right? Who was
Correct.
not a diplomat, who was not he was a calligrapher and an artist, but that one of the big differences is Tesshu was able to hobnob with politics and have an influence in the Meiji era. But Musashi, right? I think he started winning battles at age 15 or 16. These are both prodigies who got in with good schools of swordsmanship. They were physically gifted. They had mental attitude needed for the job, all parts of it, right? But you could take the same guys and, if they were out in the middle of nowhere doing rice farming, that's what they would have done. In this case, they happen to be in the right place at the right time with the right talents. And it's kind of cool, that inflection moment that leads to a really amazing life.
Yeah, I know we're talking about Tesshu, but the one thing about Musashi that I remember reading about was his first encounter when he was like 14 or 15, and he had that duel. And we kind of romanticize things. You and I are both, we seek the perfection of technique through the sword. So then you kind of project that onto these people. Well, they must have been the same, right? But what I read about Musashi's first battle was he kind of was just big and strong. And this guy, when the fight ensued, it didn't turn into like he picked him up over his head and smashed him down on the ground and like hit him with a rock or something and killed him that way. And that's how he won his first fight.
Nice guy.
Yeah.
I think there's something about those early successes, like whatever form they take. I mean, formative for me was, I was whatever, like 9 or whatever, doing judo, right, at the Ann Arbor Y MCA. And the guys go, oh, there's this big tournament coming up. You want to go? And I'm like, I don't know. Should I? Yeah, go. Right. And it's one of those things, I was out there competing, and I kind of had this moment at 9, and I go, wait a minute, I'm not nervous about this. I'm jacked, but I'm not nervous. And all my friends were really nervous. And I beat a lot of the guys in my dojo that I couldn't beat inside the dojo. I could out, right? That was like this little gift, this little blessing that said, hey man, you might have something here that you can work with. And obviously, Musashi did, and obviously Tesshu did as well.
Yeah, I feel like that as you're talking about, what it makes you think about is, Musashi was known for breaking the rules all the time, right? And maybe because he won that first fight by breaking the rules, that was, well, I'm just going to continue down this path. But Sensei, I want to ask you about, I'm assuming we haven't talked about this too much, but the bloodless surrender of, I have a question for you on that, but the first thing is just, do you want to share any information about that?
Well, why don't you tee it up? I'm no historian. I know a little bits and pieces. It's better if there's a framework in place for me to address it. Yeah.
So I guess the story about the bloodless surrender is that, Tesshu was on the side of the shogun, and there were two clans that had kind of, they had gotten together to kind of try and overthrow the shogun. And this battle ensued, and Tesshu was kind of like, the shogun said to him, like, because he was high up now, he was high up in the military, said, we just want to give up. Like, we just wanted to navigate the westernization of Japan with Commodore Perry coming. Like, we just want to kind of give up and be part of this new change in Japanese history. Can you go over there and just, I think it was the Sachu clan alliance. Can you just go over there and tell them we want to give up? So going over there means you got to go through the battlefield where people are fighting, and nobody could stop Tesshu from getting through. And when he got there, I can't remember the clan leader's name, but he was just so impressed with him. He was like, basically, how did you get here? And he's like, well, I just came through. Why are you here? And he said, well, we just want to give up. Like, we don't actually want to fight. Like, can we just work together? And eventually, yeah, the guy was so impressed with him that he said, yeah, okay, let's just find the peace, right? Like, let's figure out the path forward here. So I guess my question to you is, because this is something I started to think about, was, what if he wasn't that guy? What if he couldn't get through that battlefield? What if he didn't, like, a whole bunch of what ifs, right? Like moments in time. And that moment in time for him, like, changed the later part of his life as well.
Well, and changed the life of the entire country, right?
Right.
So if people have seen the movie The Last Samurai, right, there's a lot of names you'll recognize as part of that, right? So what the guy he went to negotiate with was Saigo Takamori, and ultimately, as a result of that meeting, he was able to tee up the meeting with Katsukaishu, who is played wonderfully. It's a wonderful character in The Last Emperor, portraying Katsukaishu, and that was the official, that led to the official surrender of Edo Castle to the imperial forces. Super cool. And then, as you said, it changed his life, because he eventually became an official of the Shizuokas, and then was a governor for a while of a prefecture, and then Emperor Meiji kind of hired him as a confidant. So he became part of the the post Meiji Restoration government, always highly thought of. Meanwhile, still training with a sword, still doing calligraphy. And then something that we absolutely positively have to get to is he was also a prodigious drinker.
Before we get to the prodigious drinker, I just think of how many families that actually maybe would have been eradicated in that war that actually exist still today because of him going and having that random conversation. And then I'm like, my mind goes to, I wonder how many doctors and lawyers and physicists and other martial artists are alive today doing things because he walked across that battlefield. Like, it's that whole chaos theory or the ripple effect, like, those ripples like matriculate out, and they're continuing to matriculate out through history because he walked across that battlefield to have that conversation.
Yeah, it's like history is the ones that rose to the place where they became documented, right? But universal truth is that those things are going on infinitely in all different ways, interacting, right? That's the beautiful complexity of the universe. But we get to see these moments, these inflection points where someone rises to the point where we pay attention to it and see how much it changes everything. Before we leave this meeting, if people want to learn more about this, reading The Sword of No Sword, right? The life of Master Warrior Tesshu. John Stevens is a delightful editor and writer, and I recommend everybody read everything he's ever touched. But he tells this story so wonderfully of Tesshu being appointed or self-chosen to make that walk. And the way he conveys it is Tesshu just had this force of personality that was so powerful that even though he's walking through enemy lines, people just kind of stood down and they're like, this guy needs to be here. Let's let him through. And it reminds me of later stories of him, meditating. It was said that his meditation power was so great that like mice would die and fall out of the walls when he was meditating in a house. And I apparently, like, one reason, if people ask me, who do you want to go back and talk to? I want to meet this guy because he must have had that radiant energy that, I was lucky to experience in my sword teacher, Yamaguchi Katsuo sensei, had that same radiant charisma that, 1 in 10,000 people have. Tesshu had it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, I'm lucky because I have 2 instructors that are 1 in 10,000. So
well, I'll pay you well for that later.
Yeah. But The Sword of No Sword, that book is also the name of his style, correct? Like that's the name of the style of swordsmanship so it's a fitting name for a book about him.
Isn't it interesting that Musashi called his, or maybe later people called it, I don't know actually, but called his Niten Ichiryu, right? 2 heavens, 1 style. In other words, 2 swords, 1. And Yamaoka Tesshu called his no sword, more of a Zen approach, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you want to talk about with the prodigious drinking?
Well, so I alluded to the poetry earlier, right? And then there was a later episode. And as I'm going to excuse myself again because I get history wrong all the time, but there was a later episode where he was having some either drinking or conversation contest with somebody, and they're like, nobody can walk to Narita and back in 1 day. And Tesshu's like, yeah, bullshit. Watch this. And the story is he put on those geita, those wooden shoes with the big wooden blocks below them, right? That everybody supposedly wore in those days. And he marched off to Narita, which from the sounds of it, it was like, I don't know, maybe he was in a closer village. It's like 45 miles or something. And he just took off, marched over there, showed up the next morning. He's like, yeah, I went to Narita and back. And the guys are like, holy crap. And they looked at his feet and the whole entire wooden blocks were worn off. And now he just had these flat sandals.
And that's how the flip-flop was invented.
Yeah, right. And then so the other story is this story. There was some guy that was super famous for drinking all kinds of sake. It was like I don't know if there was an official championship of sake drinking, but this guy was like the official champion of sake. And Tesshu kind of pulls a cool hand Luke. The guy goes, well, I can drink 20 pitchers of sake in 1 night, and Tesshu's like, well, man should be able to drink 50. So he's like, you're on. And if I have the story right, and if I don't, go buy the damn book and read it yourself, but if I have the story right, they matched for match, and then finally the other guy who was this champion just finally passed out or gave up. And then the nail in the coffin was the next morning they got up and they looked at each other, and the guy's like massively hungover, and Tesshu grabs a pitcher of sake left over and just says, hey man, good morning, I'm out. So he knew how to rub it in as well.
I like that. Yeah, that you have the pen part with Tesshu. Like, we both have the sword part. You have the pen part. I think I'd be a good prodigious drinker with him. I would probably enjoy drinking together.
I'm sure I'd lose, but I'd give it a fair shot.
Right. What else, Sensei, do you want to what do you want to share about this guy?
So first of all, the attitude, right?
Yeah.
Go out and seize the day. Do whatever you do. Go ahead and do it well. use your gifts for good, right? The calligraphy. One of the cool things about his calligraphy that I think is in one of the Stevens books is they show his calligraphy evolving over time. And a lot of times he wrote the same characters or the same poems over and over on different scrolls. And of course he had to do a million versions of things. But they did electron microscopy of his work. And according to the books, in the beginning, it was normal ink on paper, and little by little over time, you could kind of see the molecules of the ink line up. Like the supposition is he had so much energy that the energy was flowing through his brush. I don't know if it was the speed, the organization, or whatever, but you can see like it's lining up on a molecular level. And so there's this funny thing when he gets to a certain point. So since I've been a fan of Tesshu my whole life, in Japan, when I would go into museums or galleries or whatever, I was always looking to try to find examples of legitimate Tesshu calligraphy. And one day I was in Kyoto and I went to this Japanese culture museum, and they had lacquerware that the emperor used to own, and swords, ancient swords and samurai armor. And in the back, there was this little subtle sign that wasn't really emphasized, and it was the old kamikaze pilot era. And when I was walking up there, the proprietor of the museum goes, "Hey, you sure you want to go up there?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man, I get it. Like it's a bygone era. I'm not going to be offended." And it was very bonsai, Japanese spirit stuff back there. But anyway, 2 floors of exhibits. Walk down the basement. There's a lot of stuff hanging, and it's a rectangular building, and there's like an island in the middle, and there's a walkway that goes all the way around it. And I turned to my right and I looked down this long hallway, and all the way at the end of this hallway, there was this calligraphy behind glass. And it was like the hair on the back of my neck stood up. It was just like, holy shit. I am 100% certain that that's Tesshu's work, right? And I said to the person with me, I said, "That's freaking Yamaoka Tesshu. I got to go look at it." And they were like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "No, I'm fucking sure. I've never been so sure of anything in my life." And we walked like 40 feet down that hallway, and sure enough, man, it was one of the classic Tesshu pieces. And it was just like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, what you see in that electron micrograph of the molecules lined up, like the energy he put into that is still coming out of it to this day. It was just unbelievable how powerful that calligraphy was. Now, maybe that's me, putting my context in it and everything else, but what a great experience to be a fan of this guy for so long, and then just have that experience where it just pops out at you.
That's awesome. I love that. How about when you were there, Sensei, did you Yamaguchi Sensei, did you ever talk to him about Tesshu or any of these historical samurai figures? Did he have any opinions, or was he just...
Oddly enough, I did not talk to Yamaguchi Sensei about Yamaoka Tesshu. However, in a slightly more modern part of my life, the last 20 years, I've known this guy, Sato Tadayuki Sensei, who is a Tomiki Aikido expert, also a historical judo expert, and he has the best job in the world. He's a professor of martial arts at Waseda University. And awesome. You can sit that guy down and he will start talking about the Meiji Restoration or the confluence of Kano, Funakoshi, Ueshiba. Like he can talk for 3 hours on martial arts history and how it's intertwined. And one day I had him over at my house. He came to JMAC to teach. We were over at the house having dinner. And in the middle of the conversation over wine or whatever, he stops me and he goes, "Hey, Suino," he goes, "I noticed you have a portrait of Yamaoka Tesshu hanging up in JMAC. Why is that?" And I looked at him and I go, "Well, Sensei, Yamaoka Tesshu is my hero." And he goes, "Mine too. Let's talk about that." And it was so cool because all the things you and I just talked about in the last, 25 minutes, were on his list too. Like he says, "I love it because of this. I love it because of this." Of course, he's a scholar, so he had a much more detailed understanding of all this stuff than I did. I just respond to it viscerally. But it was really cool. I mean, this guy's a big deal in the traditional martial arts world in the greater Tokyo area. And we just happen to have the same idol hanging up on the walls of our dojos.
I trained with him at JMAC twice, and I trained with him above a gas station in Japan with you.
That was cool, wasn't it?
While you were throwing me around. Actually, to be honest with you, that experience was one of the ones where that style, like, like I've never really experienced it in a meaningful way, like not even in the seminars at JMAC. Like, I was doing that more for support, and I was certainly impressed by him, but inside of myself, I wasn't like, oh, I'm getting this. But when you and I were training above that gas station, there were some throws and some times where I was like, oh, like I wouldn't consider myself a believer until that point. And then I was like, oh, yes, I can see how unbalancing somebody this way would and could be very devastating if done correctly.
Yeah, two things about that. One is, if you train with him like that and you listen to him talk, of course, a lot of times you don't get the whole picture because he's speaking Japanese, but he's relating it to all the other stuff, right? He's like, this is in this historical kata, this is this guy's stuff from here, and this is from this prefecture, and let's do this throw. So not only you're doing cool shit, but you're getting the historical context at the same time. But I got to ask you this: was that before or after the experience at the Meiji Temple where you had experienced the miracle?
I think that was after the experience at the Meiji Temple.
think in the context of this conversation and powerful spiritual things, I know you've related this before, but how about telling that story again?
Okay, so I can't remember where. I might have been in Nobetsu's dojo, but somehow I pulled something or slept incorrectly, and it was like my right butt cheek, and it was excruciatingly painful. Like every step was excruciatingly painful. And for people who haven't been to Meiji Temple before, that was one of the things that Suino and I took off alone to go do. We went by ourselves, just him and I. There's some cool pictures out there floating around of him and I there. But to get there from where you get off the bus or the train, it's a hike. Like it's not, you don't just, and so you're walking through the woods. It's very picturesque. It kind of reminds me of what Central Park would be like in New York City. Meiji Temple is kind of like in this metropolis area, and it's giant park. But I remember you said to me, Sensei, like, Randy, you're in a lot of pain. Maybe we should go back to the hotel. Like, you should rest. And I'm like, I feel like this is going to be with me for the entire trip. So I'm just going to deal with the pain and limp my way around and limp my way through all the training. And that's just what I'm going to do. And so then when we finally got up to the temple, I decided to just do a prayer. So you told me what to do. So I did the thing. I went to the ladle, did my hands, went over, did the clapping, did the bowing, threw the coin in. And when I said my prayer, I just said, please let my ass stop hurting. I remember saying that in my brain, please let my ass stop hurting so I can enjoy this trip more. And then I snapped a couple of pictures, and then the police came over and told me I wasn't allowed to take pictures of the temple. And we looked in some buildings, and then we started to leave. And as we were walking, you said to me, hey, Randy, you're not limping anymore. And I'm like, you're right. And my ass doesn't hurt anymore. Like it doesn't, and it was fine from that moment on for the rest of the trip. There was no problem.
Thinking about it, I think the reason why it worked is because the gods are used to hearing people ask so politely all the time. And you came up there and just said, let my ass stop hurting. They're like, oh, this guy's authentic. Let's give it to him.
That's probably what Tesshu would have said, right? He probably would have been a little bit drunk and said, can you just let my ass stop hurting?
I'm sure that's not the most profane thing he ever said.
Right. How are we doing for time, Sensei?
We have less than 1 minute left.
So we should probably, I think one of the cool things about Tesshu is, that he was employed by the emperor.
Mm-hmm.
And the emperor wanted to employ him forever. And he said, look, I'm not good. I'm not that good a person, just only 10 years. And he did only work for him for 10 years. But, the story goes that he died in Zazen, in meditation, facing Meiji, or not Meiji, facing the imperial palace, right? Like that's how he died. Yeah,
dedicated to his people. Stomach cancer, common malady in the Japanese people. No doubt, all his drinking didn't help with that. But he lived to 56, so not a long life by our standards, but reasonable in those days. I think it was 56, something like that.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
But not the amount. What does that say? Not the amount of years in your life, the amount of life in your years, and he had a lot of life in his years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been great. Since these conversations are always so easy, like to do.
I love them. They're so dense. I just, before we shut the recording off, I want to just leave us on a quote. So is there any housekeeping we need to do before we
I guess
get the quote?
we're going to do more of these. Check them out. These are the ones when we don't have a show. We try and punch these out just to give the audience what they want. And we really appreciate that you want stuff from us. And we're going to keep doing it because it's fun. We're not making any money currently off of this. The last sponsor, we've kind of abandoned that one because it wasn't well received by us and other people. But so, if you want to help us, you can just subscribe to our stuff and you can like our pages. And if you want to get really crazy about it, you can go share this stuff. Like you can put it on your own personal page so that your audience sees it, and then maybe they'll be interested to follow and like and subscribe as well. 100%. So I think that's our housekeeping issues.
Yeah, and friendly reminder to folks, if there's somebody you want to see on Punch Kick Choke Chat, whether it's a micro episode, our shorts of 1 hour, or the full-blown Thursday evening episodes, we've got a submit a guest spot on our website, punchkickchokechat.com. Man, this is fun. We've met so many great people and so many great viewers as well.
Awesome.
So
hit us with a quote, Sensei.
The quote, Yamaoka Tesshu. There's so many quotes. One of my favorites is this one. If you want to obtain the secrets of such wonderful techniques, drill yourself, harden yourself, undergo severe training, abandon body and mind. Follow this course for years, and you will naturally reach the profoundest level. To know if water is hot or cold, you must taste it yourself.
Love that. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, man.